horrible shit happens. It
Mhm.
happens on massive scale. It happens and it has cascading impacts across generations on
Mhm.
whole peoples and on individuals. And it can be as big as war and genocide. It can be as minimal as, minimal. It could be as sort of grand in our minds as war and genocide, but equally impactful for the individual person. It could be as simple as neglect or not being loved properly. We all have wounds and traumas. I think it was you quoted Viktor Frankl, or you referenced him in his book. He had a metaphor which was that, like, all trauma creates smoke in the room, and it's like it doesn't make sense to compare traumas because it's all just smoke in the room, and at some point it doesn't really matter what it is, the smoke fills up the room and it's just as
Mhm.
impactful on the individual. um, so with that said, I want to go back to something you were saying earlier. Like, you've been talking about, the possibility of this kind of work to help us, better get beyond ourselves and be empathetic with each other, see each other, recognize our connections, through and as each other. But you'd also mentioned the possibility of doing sort of deep healing work. And you talk about this in the book a lot, processing or healing trauma or wounds. What is it about these, what is it specifically, I suppose, about a kind of psychedelic mind meld type experience that assists this trauma or wound healing or processing?
Right. Well, if we think of trauma again as something that can lodge itself in the body, and again, this is often associated with the chemicals that play when we end up, living in the moment of the trauma. So let's say someone is sexually abused or physically abused by a parent or a priest or, some person, a teacher or something like that. In the moment of the trauma, the body is flooded with a variety of chemicals which are meant to, help the person try to flee, to fight back, these various types of defense mechanisms. And basically, what can happen is that the chemicals aren't fully played out in the moment of the trauma. They basically end up kind of lodged in the body. Of course, with this psychological story of being traumatized, of the event itself, and how, the ego, in a sense, has been completely disempowered, and the person has been abused. So again, this stuff gets actually caught in the flesh, and there's, a lot of really good books that I reference in my book about how this occurs. And so when in the psychedelic mind meld, it's another healing modality. And I want to say that there's a lot of other various forms of healing modalities out there. I mean, we can get into yoga and various types of massage and breath work, etc., that help release these traumas from the body. So what we're basically trying to do is bring the body back into health, releasing and processing that which is stuck in order for the body to kind of return to its peak health, which is, its peak level of homeostasis, to be as functioning as possible, where we can, again, enjoy life as much as possible and be engaged in life as much as possible, dropping into our creative abilities wherever they may show up and how we connect to other people. Um, and I've worked, we'll say, in environments with a lot of traumatized people in the past, and it really stands out. Like if someone is really, like, really traumatized, and how much it prevents them from living life in a sense. And of course. We see that most obviously with people who are caught up in addictions, and there's lots of different types of addictions that are not only related to substance abuse, but the ones, the substance abuse is the one that stands out the most. And alcohol, of course, being the most prevalent one on the planet, I would argue the most destructive drug on the planet. And there's a lot of research and various organizations and governments around the world that say the same. If you look at the overall data in terms of, people killed by drinking and driving, domestic abuse, accidental death, and of course, never mind the fact that alcohol is a neurotoxin and carcinogen that over time kills you, and that's even in low to moderate, but consistent drinking over a lifetime. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's these layers, right? And one of the things, actually mentioning substance abuse, is that psychedelics can help people move away from substance abuse. I mean, and there's lots of stories, and I've seen it personally with the work I've facilitated of people who were caught up in a form of addiction, whether it was alcohol, and let's not forget that THC, as much as marijuana, I think, has healing capacities and can be used for medical purposes. THC, unfortunately, is addictive, and I know people who have smoked pot, daily throughout their lives over decades, and that's an addiction. And I've seen people work with psychedelics and step away from those types of addictions. Again, looking at greater health, seeing the body, and I mentioned this briefly in the book, as the holy temple. Let's look at ourselves as divine beings and take care of ourselves. And so, yeah, in terms of the mind meld, I think it's just one way to access that healing and how we can basically be engaged in that together, where one person may not do it alone. So you can drop into a psychedelic session on your own. You can find your own healing, absolutely. But when doing the work together, you may drop into something that the other person just can't access and open that up for processing and release. And again, with a target of overall better healing and health.
Hmm. And one of the things that you had mentioned in your book was the sort of possibility that, when going into a space like that with another person and facing this, like these aspects of yourself that you can't otherwise get to on your own, or even if you were in your own experience, it's like managing and holding it can be very difficult. There's something about in this kind of shared consciousness space that another person being there can really support the being seen and held in ways that even just another person in the room being compassionate but not being there like with you on the shared consciousness level just can't reach in the same way.